بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Welcome to the Ethics of Disagreement course, the adab al-ikhtilaf or the adab al-khilaf as it's known in Arabic. A few preliminaries. You should all have, am I right in saying, Brother Mohsin, that they all should now have the PDF of the notes? It'll be sent to their email. So the material that we'll see on the screen, you'll have 80% of that material, all the verses, scholarly quotations and the principles, both in Arabic and English. They'll be sent to you, to your email in PDF format. The PowerPoint presentation that we're going to see now is more or less a slightly enhanced version of your notes. That's point one. Point two is that much of this, all of this material, I think, or at least 90% of the material that I'll cover, can be found in a book that I authored a while back called Fussing Over the 15th of Sha'ban and the Golden Rule of Differing. So this book took the issue of Sha'ban, the middle of Sha'ban, and whether Muslims should treat that particular night, the 15th night, as a special holy night, or whether it's an ordinary night, and looked at why the disagreements occur, and gleaned from there, or cultivated from there, two golden rules of differing, which classically have been the underpinnings of Muslim unity and orderliness away from the political order. So, and it's on sale at the moment, alhamdulillah, with other books as well, including an early treatise on adab al-ikhtilaf by the late Tahir Jabir Alwani, rahmatullah alayh. So all of the kind of quotations, the original sources for much of this material can be found in here, as well as a case study of the 15th of Sha'ban. When I'm discussing this course, I will throw in a few issues that Muslims do argue over and have become or are contentious, and perhaps try to see what the cause of disagreement is, linking it to the principles that we're discussing. So I do urge you, if you do have an opportunity, to purchase this book. Finally, what I thought was, originally I thought, let's work through this book. And I've worked through this book with a number of groups and classes for some time. But the material here can be very dense. And I've come to realize that it's best, the book is best read just as a book. And one can mull over the chapters and what's said in there. What I've done is I've taken the core material from the book and try to present them as questions. So actually, let's start. So 5 principles concerning the ethics of disagreement. Actually, it's a good point here to let me ask you, what would you expect? What do you expect in a course such as this? What are you hoping to go away with? Then we can see if I can manage to live up to that. Otherwise, the exit is nearby for me. Anybody? What do you expect? Sorry, whilst the mic is being passed around.
How to tell like what's a valid difference of opinion and what's like invalid? What's just people kind of.
Okay, and why do you say that? How one of the things that you wish to learn is how to distinguish between a valid and an invalid, a legitimate and an illegitimate difference of opinion. Is there any reason behind that?
For a lot of issues that have a lot of different perspectives and opinions, it's hard to tell which opinions come from like some sort of trusted,
a valid trust, sound basis.
And which opinions are just kind of people giving their own kind of take.
Absolutely. Well, that's brilliant. That particular question, I can breathe a sigh of relief and say, actually, it's one of the specific questions and principles that we deal with. Anybody else have anything that they're hoping to gain from this?
To find out how scholars in the past dealt with differences of opinion.
Okay, to find out how past scholars dealt with differences of opinion. That's also embedded in here, but I chose not to give any specific case study as I've done in this book, but nonetheless, I'll kind of voice it, and if you wish to raise an issue and say, well, what about this issue or that matter, we can explore that as well. But no doubt at all, we have to, that will be a core part of the learning. Anything else? Okay, well, what I've done here is I've taken 5 principles that I feel are very important, and actually we'll actually find that the ulama, the scholars, especially of the past, the classical scholars, consider this to be very important, not necessarily for the lay people, because quite often, bearing in mind a pre-modern age, a pre-social media internet age, and if you're going back even further, an age in which books and literature wasn't widely available, pre-printing press age, which is the majority of human history, it's not like the ordinary people had books and books and books on their shelves at home that they can access. In fact, even scholars, whether Muslim scholars or non-Muslim scholars in any field, it wasn't a guarantee that they too would have books and books at home on their shelves. There might be a place, a monastery or a church, a madrasa, a library, which housed these books that specialists and scholars would have to access. Okay? So some of these principles which are relevant now to even the lay public, let alone students of knowledge and scholars, may not have been a necessity to know by the Muslim laity, the Muslim lay people in an earlier age, because they simply just kept in their lane and just left it entirely to the scholars. Now that we have access to scholarly material, whether in an organized or a disorganized fashion, this becomes more of an issue for us to begin to know. It's not that it never happened in Islamic history, but it was few and far between that the lay people would make an issue out of something, would make a mountain out of a molehill on some religious issue. There were times of intolerance and bigotry dotted around the Muslim world throughout Muslim history. But by and large, that was the exception, and the norm was that the scholars may discuss, may argue, may debate, may refute, may rebut in their writings and encounters with one another. But by and large, the lay people were shielded from such matters. Okay? And the scholars of old, as the scholars today generally try to follow, that principle, himmatul ulama ar-ri'aya wa himmatul sufaha ar-riwaya. The concern of the scholar is to shepherd, to cultivate, to nurture. And the concern of the foolish is just to narrate. You know, whatever they know, just say it, whether it's going to have a positive or a negative consequence, whether it enhances a person's connection to Allah or disconnects them from God, just to narrate. Okay, and that's not the way of the scholars. The scholarly way is himmatul ulama ar-ri'aya. This ri'aya, this shepherding, this cultivating, this nurturing step by step is the way. So I've taken 5 principles and I've embedded them in 5 questions. 5 principles which come about through 5 questions. Okay, so what are these questions? And again, this is all in your PDF notes. 5 questions which we're going to explore today. Firstly, where does the issue of Muslim unity stand in the teachings of Islam? Secondly, are differences of opinion a mercy or a menace? Are they beneficial or harmful? Thirdly, what constitutes a legitimate difference of opinion? Fourthly, what are the categories of people in terms of fiqh rulings? And I'll explain that when we get to that particular section. And finally, how does the duty of commanding good and forbidding evil, or enjoining good and forbidding evil, apply to matters of differences? And again, I'll explore that in some detail, or we'll explore that when we come to that final section. So these are 5 questions. And as we go through these 5 questions and begin to connect to the ethics of disagreement, the adab al-ikhtilaf, at the end of each section we'll learn 5 principles, or a principle. So at the end of the day, I hope you'll go away with 5 principles which really sum up and distill the whole issue of adab al-ikhtilaf. Okay, so those were the 5 questions. Let's go through the first one. And the first one's pretty standard, pretty straightforward, at least in concept. Where does unity rank in Islam? Anybody hazard a guess here? Unity rank in Islam? What do we know about unity? Important, not important? Obligatory, recommended, disliked, prohibited? Unity is whereabouts on the scales of Islamic teachings? Absolutely high up, really high up, okay? To the degree that overall, as a rule of thumb, unity between Muslims is an obligation. So where does unity rank? There are many, many verses in the Quran. I've chosen this one, which is, I'm sure, familiar to you all. The Quran says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold fast all together to the rope of Allah and be not divided. The Quran will say elsewhere, وَلَا تَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا كُلُّ حِزْبٍ بِمَا لَدَيْهِ فَرِحُونَ. Do not be amongst the idolaters, those who split up their religion and become sects, each party being pleased with what it has. Okay? إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. The Quran will say elsewhere, indeed the believers are nothing but brothers, so make peace and reconciliation with one another. And there are many other verses and sayings of the Prophet ﷺ in this regard. Let's take a scholarly saying, and actually before I go and read that, let me point out another thing. I can't think of anything in the material that you have or in these course notes which is outside of normative Islamic scholarly teachings. Whatever scholar is going to be cited in this discussion, what they're saying is pretty normative. That is to say, no other scholar would disagree with what is being said or proffered here. And that's important. Why? Because if we want to learn something important about Islam, we try not to learn it through opinions that are on the fringe and then try to build a case on that. If nevertheless, I do realize that there is maybe a fringe word or a fringe sentence or a fringe statement, I will indeed point that out to you. But as far as I'm aware, in my notes that that's not the case. So where does unity rank? So we have these words from Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayh. Realize that from the great essentials which make up the sum total of the religion are the joining of hearts, uniting the word, and reconciling between people. Allah says, and here's the verses in English, fear Allah and set right relationships between yourselves. وَأَصْلِهُ بَيْنِكُمْ. Okay? To make Islam, reconciliation and harmony, and setting right things between ourselves. And they don't have to be big things, or some kind of political grievance that I may have with a fellow Muslim. No, it could just be something small that causes hearts to differ, or to even harbor some type of enmity or malice. Even if it doesn't reach that level, but it causes some kind of turbulence in the heart, from my heart to the heart of another believing Muslim, then فَأَصْلِهُ بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. There's a command to make peace and reconciliation with one another. However peace and harmony is restored, that becomes the required duty. We cannot and we must not allow those type of differences which lead to enmity, animosity, rancor to fester in our hearts, because such festering is no doubt a poison, not only poisoning my relationship with another or with others, but also beginning to veil me from the mercy and the barakah and the grace of God. Okay, from the mercy and the blessings and the grace of God. So fear Allah and set right relationships between you. And Allah says, hold fast all together to the rope of Allah and be not divided. And in another verse, we find the Quran saying, and be not like those who fell into division and dispute after clear proofs have come to them. Ibn Taymiyyah then ends by saying, the likes of such proofs, such verses from the Quran, that order unity and harmony and forbid division and discord, occur frequently. That is to say, there are many textual proofs in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ ordering this very matter of unity and prohibiting disunity. And I know it's become a bit of a cliche amongst Muslims in general that we must be united, we mustn't be disunited, and it's a very popular, understandable theme of khutbahs. But actually, unity, having Muslim unity is not something we just verbalize. It has to be actualized. And we're not talking about only unity between different polities of Muslims, different countries and states, but also just between us as individuals. And I just want to make a side point, and I'm pretty certain that the likes of yourselves have thought about this already. But how can I be talking about Muslim unity when I know that my character is such that I can be obnoxious, I can be harsh, I can be cutting with my comments, and I'm making no effort to rein in those gremlins of my character. That part, and those characters are such, those character traits are such that I repel people sometimes. People find it difficult to get closer to me, and yet I'll make no attempt as part of unity, okay, let alone as part of purification of the soul, to rein in those traits. I'm talking about unity, but my character is so obnoxious quite often that people find it difficult to approach me or to kind of gel with me. How can I be talking about unity if I am a source of repelling, or I am a source of disunity or discord myself? It becomes perhaps hypocritical if we're not making that effort in being a source, a small source of unity. And so this section, part one, which we've now come to the end of this section. Here is the principle. Again, it's from Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullah alayhi. It doesn't have to be. But he says, كُلُّ مَا أَوْجَبَ فِتْنَةً أَوْ فُرْقَةً فَلَيْسَ مِنَ الدِّينِ. All that brings about discord or division cannot be part of the religion. Okay? All that brings about discord or division can't be part of the religion. Okay. It's clear when we think about bigoted nationalism, and I say bigoted nationalism because perhaps there can be, I'm not saying that there is, an argument for benign nationalism, that I'm happy to be an Egyptian, a Somali, I don't know, a Mauritanian, okay, or a Pakistani or a Bengali, and I don't consider myself being superior or inferior to anyone else of a different nationality merely because it's, but you know, the beautiful hills of Bangladesh and the beautiful deserts of Mauritania, they just, you know, they strike a chord in my heart, okay? And in that sense, I am, or in our case, in that sense, I'm an Englishman or a Brit because I like English literature, poetry, I love going down to Dover or Devon, okay, as opposed to going abroad. Then those things are, if they are tib'iyya, if they are natural, okay, one just naturally likes their homeland and feels an affinity to its the culture and the people. If that can be called nationalism in some sense, then maybe that can be a benign nationalism. I'm talking about the nationalism which is divided. We Saudis are better than you Pakistanis, and we Pakistanis are better than you Bengalis, and we Bengalis are better than you Tunisians, and we Tunisians better than you Egyptians, so on and so forth. Okay, and we stick together, come what may, against you. Okay, then that kind of division, no doubt, is something Islam prohibits, condemns. It's something that brings about, even in the times that we witness today, discord and division. That's an obvious one. But what about when Ibn Taymiyyah says, كُلُّ مَا أَوْجَبَ فِتْنَةً وَفُرْقَةً, that whatever brings about, or all that brings about discord and division can't be part of the religion? Well, what happens if I use a hadith, which is like saying Sahih Bukhari, no doubt about its authenticity, these are genuinely the Prophet's words, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I utilize it, and it causes discord and division? First and foremost, can that happen? Can someone utilize a verse of the Quran or a saying of the Prophet ﷺ in a way that causes schism? Does that happen? All right. So does that mean that that verse of the Quran or that hadith, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, فَلَيْسَ مِنَ الدِّينِ, isn't part of the religion? No, obviously not. It's the Quran, okay? If anything is part of the religion, it's the Quran, okay? The Sunnah. So, of course, Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't mean, well, that the Quran isn't part of the religion, the Hadith isn't part of the religion. What does he mean then in that sense? What could he mean in that sense? If a verse has been used to cause fitna, trial and tribulation, of furqa, schism, splitting, division. So what does that mean then? Barakallahu feekum. The way it's being utilized is not part of religion. Okay? So either something is not part of religion, like that bigoted nationalism, for example, or it actually, in essence, the thing is part of the religion, but the way it's being utilized is not part of the religion, is not what religion orders or instructs. That's really important. One of the calamities of today is, and you see this on social media, and I'm not quite sure, is it an illness that afflicts only Muslims, or is it just across the board, Muslims or non-Muslims, just the age we live in? But people either have lost the art to discern detail in a person saying, or choose not to, out of some malice or egotistical reason. Whatever the case is, sometimes you see the most absurd things being argued over on social media. Someone says something, and let's just stick with the Muslims, and it's like, okay, well, you can generally see what he or she is trying to say, and then someone says, oh, but does that imply X, Y, Z? And maybe the person who said this didn't imply X, Y, Z. Okay? And if someone reminds me, and we can bring it up in question and answer time, there is a principle in Islam that says, lazimul madhab laysa bi madhab. Whatever my view necessitates may not necessarily be part of my view. I may say something, ... one of the consequences is X. But I may not have intended in my saying X. I may have only be using my saying for this point, not all these other points. So merely because one could possibly deduce from my saying X, it doesn't mean I intended X. Lazimul madhab laysa bi madhab. Okay? Which is why we need to be generous to each other and do what the Quran says, and take the best of meanings from people, unless of course we know them to be evil people, and generally what they say is evil and divisive, then there's an excuse. But on the whole, most people are not like that, and we need to be brotherly and generous in trying to understand the best of what people say, give a good interpretation, and that's what the Quran instructs as well. Okay, so principle one, all that brings about discord or division cannot be part of the religion. Okay, that includes how my character is, the way that I speak and behave with others, whether I'm aiming for orthodoxy in Islam or heterodoxy, the opposite, whether it's a political issue that is inciting division and splits, or even war and fighting and bloodshed, whatever it may be, whatever brings about this discord isn't part of the deen. And if we keep that in mind and the principle of unity seriously, then Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will definitely bless us. Okay, where does unity rank in Islam? It's an obligation to unite, prohibition to disunite, and that's how high up it is. Okay. The second question of the 5, is differing a mercy or a menace? And the question here is differences, or are differences of opinion amongst Muslims on religious issues something that is good or bad, something that is conducive or divisive, mercy or menace? Okay? Any offers on that? Are differences between Muslims a blessing or a bane, a blessing or a curse? Blessing. So we have one person for blessing. Any agreeers, any contenders? Anybody who believes that differing is a menace?
Do you mean as in from a scholarly point of view in terms of fiqh, or just differences between the general public about general stuff?
Okay, so let's take the first part. Scholarly differences between Muslims. Those type of differences, is that a mercy or a menace?
I think it's a mercy.
You say it's a mercy. What about just between Muslims on, well, I don't like the color of your wallpaper, it's absolutely horrid?
I guess you just take that as part of life, but it doesn't really add or take away from anything depending on how it's expressed.
So part of life, and perhaps one might not have an opinion about it one way or the other. Okay, alhamdulillah. Good thing is, we will halt at this point, because I'm trying to keep each session to about 25 minutes, and we'll explore this after a 5-7 minute break. Is that okay? Brilliant, alhamdulillah. So we've been left hanging.